The rain fell softly, tapping against the window in a rhythmic lullaby as the city hummed beneath a veil of gray. Inside the small, dimly lit diner, a single waitress moved with quiet precision, her hands trembling slightly as she gathered leftover food into a worn paper bag. The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the distant murmur of passing cars and the faint hum of a lonely heater. Her eyes flickered with a flicker of something unspoken, weariness, hope, perhaps a fragile glimmer of defiance. She kept the leftover food in that bag, a small act of rebellion, a silent testament to her circumstances. No one saw the tears that welled up just beneath her lashes, or the way her shoulders slumped with the weight of unspoken dreams. To the world, she was just a single waitress, an invisible thread in the fabric of the city's endless tide. But tonight that bag held more than just scraps. It held her resilience, her quiet refusal to let go of the hope that someday, things might be different. And then, in that moment of suspended stillness, a figure entered, the disguised CEO, cloaked in the guise of anonymity, observing from the shadows. His eyes, sharp and perceptive, caught the subtle tremble in her hand as she tucked the bag away. He saw beyond the uniform, beyond the tired smile, into the depths of her silent story. The world might have dismissed her as just another face in the crowd, but he could see the flicker of potential, the unspoken yearning buried beneath layers of exhaustion. As rain continued to fall, blending with the quiet pulse of her heartbeat, she didn't know he was watching. She didn't know that her small act of holding on to leftover food, her simple, unassuming act of survival, had sparked something in him. A silent acknowledgement that beneath the surface of everyday life, stories of resilience and quiet strength are waiting to be seen. In that moment, the city's endless rain seemed to wash away the noise and distraction, leaving only the raw truth of her vulnerability, her hope shimmering faintly like a distant star, fragile yet unyielding. And somewhere in the shadows, a disguised CEO recognized her story, and understood that sometimes, the greatest change begins with a single act of silent defiance. This is her story, and maybe, just maybe, it's a story worth listening to. The dim glow of the street lamp filtered through a cracked window, casting long shadows across her small apartment. She sat alone at the battered kitchen table, clutching the empty paper bag like a fragile relic. Her hands trembled as if the weight of the world pressed down on her shoulders, pressing the tears that threatened to spill over into the silence. It wasn't just the hunger that gnawed at her, though that was relentless. It was the ache of feeling invisible, of carrying a grief too heavy for words. Every day was a quiet battle, a constant negotiation with exhaustion and longing. She remembered the laughter that once filled her life, now replaced by the echo of memories and the hollow ache of loss. Her eyes, once bright with hope, now reflected a deep, aching loneliness, an emptiness that no amount of hours working behind a counter could fill. She had loved and lost, and in those quiet moments, she wondered if anyone truly saw her, if anyone cared enough to notice the cracks beneath her facade. The leftover food in that bag was more than sustenance. It was a silent testament to her resilience, a small act of holding on when everything else seemed to be slipping away. She tucked it away in her bag, careful not to let anyone see the trembling in her hands. Her heart felt like a fragile bird, fluttering painfully within her chest, afraid to take flight again. She knew the world regarded her as just another face, another worker, another anonymous soul lost in the endless tide of city life. But beneath her tired exterior was a quiet storm of vulnerability, a story of grief and hope intertwined. She listened to the distant hum of the city, the rain softly tapping on the window, and wondered if anyone could hear her silent plea for kindness, for understanding. Her shoulders slumped as she stared into the darkness, feeling the weight of her loneliness settle like a heavy cloak around her. Her tears shimmered in the faint light, unshed, unspoken, carrying the stories of days filled with rejection, moments of despair, and the faint but persistent flicker of hope that refused to die. She was no hero in the eyes of the world, just a woman trying to survive one day at a time, with nothing but her fragile heart and quiet resilience. And yet, in that vulnerability, there was a strange beauty, a reminder that even in the depths of pain, hope quietly breathes, waiting for the moment to bloom. As she closed her eyes, listening to the rain's gentle lament, She wondered if anyone would ever truly see her, not just her tired face, but the storm within. Perhaps, somewhere in the darkness, her story was waiting to be noticed, to be understood, to be changed. And in that silent hope, she dared to believe that one day, her story might find a reader, a witness, someone willing to listen. The door creaked softly as it swung open, letting in a gust of cold air that carried the scent of rain and damp earth. He hesitated just inside, an awkward figure with a worn jacket and tired eyes that had seen too much without quite knowing how to forget. His name was Mark, a neighbor, a stranger, someone who had long ago learned the art of unnoticed presence. He was never quite comfortable with small talk, never quite sure how to bridge the gap between himself and the quiet lives unfolding around him. Today, he stood in the doorway, hesitant, unsure if his footsteps would be welcomed or shunned. He had watched the woman through his window many times, her shoulders hunched against the cold, her movements slow and deliberate as she went about her day. Never intrusive, just a shadow in the corner of his view, yet something about her loneliness always lingered in his mind. Tonight, with the rain falling in steady rhythm, he saw her again, her silhouette bowed over the small table, eyes distant and vacant, as if carrying a burden far heavier than her frame could hold. He knew better than to think he could fix her pain, to believe that simple gestures could erase the scars of loss or rejection. But as he hesitated, a faint ache of empathy stirred within him. Quietly, he moved toward the window, not wanting to disturb, just observing, like a ghost watching over an unspoken story. His gaze lingered on her for a long moment, noticing the trembling hands that clasped the bag, the way her shoulders shook ever so slightly, a silent testament to her fragile world. It was a small gesture, perhaps unnoticed by anyone else, but for him, it was enough to see her, really see her, in her unguarded vulnerability. He didn't speak, didn't knock, didn't try to offer hollow words. Instead, he simply left a paper bag on her doorstep, a gesture familiar and humble, as if to say, "I see you. I notice." No words were exchanged, no promises made, only the quiet act of kindness that didn't demand acknowledgement. The rain continued to fall, tapping softly on the roof like a gentle heartbeat, echoing the unspoken connection forged in that silent moment. As she eventually discovered the bag, her fingers brushed against it hesitantly, feeling the weight of it, literal and symbolic. She looked outward, uncertain, yet something in her eyes softened, a flicker of recognition in the quiet gesture. It wasn't grand or miraculous. It was imperfect and humble, just a small act from someone who understood that sometimes, kindness isn't loud or showy, it's simply being present in the smallest of ways. Mark didn't stay to watch her reaction, retreating into the shadows, uncertain if his gesture mattered. But as he stepped back into the rain, a faint smile touched his lips, a quiet acknowledgement that even in the depths of loneliness, a simple act of kindness can echo like a ripple in still water, gentle, slow, and impossible to ignore. And as she looked down at the bag, her heart beat a little steadier, caught in the quiet poetry of that fleeting moment, a reminder that sometimes, the smallest gestures carry the weight of something much bigger, hope, connection, and the unspoken promise that no one truly walks alone. The next few days unfolded with the quiet rhythm of small, unspoken exchanges. Mark would sometimes leave a cup of coffee on her doorstep, its warmth barely touching the cold air outside. Other mornings, he'd catch her just as she stepped outside, and without a word, he'd hold his umbrella a little higher, offering it without expectation. The rain had become a constant companion, washing over the city like a soft lament, yet in those moments, something subtle shifted, an unspoken understanding that neither needed to speak aloud. She learned to recognize the small gestures, to sense the warmth behind his hesitant nods, the way he'd carefully place a bread roll on her table when her shift ended, just enough to remind her she wasn't invisible. Their interactions were slow, tentative, like the first delicate buds of spring breaking through cold soil. She hesitated at first, unsure if she deserved kindness after so much silence, after so many days spent feeling unseen. But gradually, she found herself returning the gestures, offering a cup of tea she'd brewed, sharing a quiet smile over a simple meal, her fingers brushing his as they exchanged a bag of groceries. Each small act was a fragile bridge, gently breaking down the walls she'd built around her heart. In the quiet companionship of those moments, her shoulders loosened slightly, and her eyes held a softer light, less haunted, more alive with the possibility of connection. Mark, too, was learning. He was imperfect, sometimes awkward, often unsure if he was doing enough. His own life wasn't easy. He carried wounds of his own, regrets, unspoken disappointments. Yet, in these shared routines, he found a kind of solace, a reminder that kindness doesn't need grand gestures to matter. It's in the way she clung to a cup of tea, in her reluctant but genuine smile when she took the bread, in the way she paused to listen when he hesitated, offering a piece of himself in small, imperfect ways. One rainy afternoon, she found herself hesitating at her door, holding a crumpled scarf that she noticed was frayed at the edges. Without thinking, she wrapped it around his neck when he paused near her window, a gesture born of gratitude and unspoken understanding. He looked at her, eyes full of quiet emotion, uncertain whether this was enough or just a fleeting moment, yet he nodded, grateful for the silent acknowledgement that they were no longer strangers. The rain persisted, each drop a gentle percussion on the roof, echoing the rhythm of their slow, tentative bond. Her world, once a quiet void filled with loneliness, now held small flashes of warmth, shared smiles, a cup of coffee, a protective umbrella in the pouring rain. Still, beneath these gentle acts, a shadow lingered, an external storm threatening to unravel what had begun to bloom. The city's chaos had a way of creeping into lives, pulling at fragile threads of peace with rising external conflicts, an uncertain future, looming layoffs, whispers of change that threatened to undo what little stability they'd found. Yet, even as these storms gathered, the small gestures persisted, simple acts of kindness that quietly fortified her heart. Because sometimes, it's not the grand rescue that saves us, but the small, persistent acts that remind us we're not alone. That amid the relentless rain and rising storms, hope can be found in the gentle touch of a scarf, the offer of an umbrella, the shared silence that says, "I see you." And in those moments she began to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, the smallest acts of kindness might be the quiet roots from which resilience grows, ready to face whatever storms the world might bring. The city's pulse was relentless, but beneath its surface, something darker was stirring. Rumors began to ripple through the neighborhood like a sudden gust of wind, whispers that grew louder with each passing day. It started with a few sideways glances, a neighbor's knowing smirk, but soon, the words became undeniable. Gossip about the quiet woman and her mysterious visitor, their tentative friendship seen as something more, something shameful. The once gentle rhythm of small acts was disrupted by the sharp sting of judgment. One morning, her small apartment was awash with the harsh glare of coming dawn, and she awoke to the distant hum of voices that she recognized as her neighbors, her community. The words cut through her like icy blades, spilling into her quiet world. "Did you hear? They're seen together, like that." The whispers grew louder, faster, unrelenting, filling her with an uncomfortable dread she couldn't shake. She tried to ignore it, to pretend it was nothing, but the weight of their scrutiny pressed down on her shoulders, heavy as a storm cloud ready to burst. Her hands trembled as she looked out the window, her fragile heart pounding like a drum. She felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the walls she'd carefully built around herself had cracked open, revealing her deepest fears. The outside world's judgment pierced through her fragile hope, threatening to shatter everything she had begun to rebuild. Her thoughts spiraled into doubt. Was this what she deserved? Could she ever find safety in a world that seemed eager to condemn her for simply existing? Her eyes flickered to the small bag she kept, her silent testament to resilience, and she clutched it tightly, feeling the weight of her loneliness press even heavier. It was then that she saw him, Mark, standing at a distance, his face etched with concern. His eyes flicked nervously toward the crowd gathering outside her door, his jaw clenched, helpless. She saw the way he hesitated, caught between loyalty and fear, unsure whether to confront the storm or retreat. His presence was a quiet anchor amid the chaos, yet she sensed that even he was uncertain how to navigate this storm. The external judgment was a tidal wave threatening to sweep everything away: her fragile hope, her tentative trust, the small but steady bond they built. She felt the familiar pang of rejection gnawing at her, a reminder of her past pains and the scars she carried deep inside. She wondered if this was the moment her quiet resilience would crack, if the weight of the outside world would drown the fragile connection they'd nurtured. And yet, amidst the rising tide of doubt, she saw him, Mark, standing firm, not as a hero, but as a witness to her vulnerability. His presence, imperfect and uncertain, was a reminder that sometimes, the greatest act of loyalty is simply to stand beside someone when the world wants to tear them down. The storm outside raged on, but inside her, a flicker of something stubborn and fierce refused to die. It was a fragile ember, threatening to go out, yet still burning, small but persistent. The external obstacle had revealed the harsh truth: the world would not always be kind, and her trust would be tested. But in that moment, she realized that the real strength lay not in avoiding the storm, but in finding the courage to face it with someone willing to stand beside her, however imperfectly. As she looked at Mark, she saw not a savior, but a partner, someone who might not erase her pain but could share its weight. And in the shadows of doubt and fear, she understood that sometimes, the greatest act of loyalty is simply holding on, through the rain, through the judgment, through the storms that threaten to drown her. Because even in the darkest clouds, hope persists, softly, quietly, waiting for the moment to break through. The storm outside had not abated, but inside her little apartment, the air grew thick with silence, weighted by the unspoken tension that hovered like a fragile curtain ready to tear. She sat near the window, the rain streaking down the glass in twisting patterns, her gaze distant and unfocused. The noise of the outside world, gossip, judgment, the whispers that threatened to drown her, still echoed in her mind, but amid it all, there was a quiet presence. Mark stood just a few steps away, his shoulders squared but his expression soft, eyes fixed not on her but on the storm outside. He hadn't spoken a word since arriving, knowing that sometimes words only add to the chaos. Instead, he simply stayed, standing firm, unwavering in the face of external forces trying to push her back into silence. He was an imperfect anchor, quiet and human, with a shaky resolve that matched her own. His hands rested loosely at his sides, but he was present, listening, watching, bearing witness to her vulnerability. His loyalty was not shouted or dramatic. It was in the steady silence, in the way he didn't flinch when her trembling hands reached out to clutch her coat, or when her eyes shimmered with tears she was trying so hard to hide. She felt the weight of his presence like an anchor, grounding her in the tumult. The outside world might have sought to define her by rumor and gossip, but he was simply there, unchanged, unjudging. When she finally looked at him, her voice caught in her throat, but she managed a faint whisper. "Thank you?" It wasn't much, but it was enough to feel the quiet strength in his gaze. He nodded, offering a small, uncertain smile that didn't pretend to have all the answers. His loyalty was imperfect. Like her, he was learning how to stand firm amidst chaos, how to hold space without trying to fix everything. Instead, he simply stayed, a quiet testament that sometimes, the greatest support is just showing up when it's hardest to do so. Hours later, as the storm outside began to fade into a gentle drizzle, he walked beside her as she stepped out into the muted city. The streets shimmered with the aftermath of rain, reflecting a sky that was clearing slowly, revealing a hint of dawn breaking through the clouds. She clutched her coat tighter, feeling the weight of the external conflict still lingering, but also sensing a shift within her. Mark's presence was not a cure, but a reminder that resilience is built in moments of quiet steadfastness, when someone chooses to stay, to listen, to walk beside us even when the world turns its back. His loyalty was a small, human act, an act that echoed in her heart, whispering that she was not alone in this. As they moved through the quiet streets, she felt a subtle awakening, the realization that her strength was not in pretending to be unbreakable, but in allowing herself to be vulnerable and supported by someone who simply refused to walk away. The external storm might still threaten, but her inner storm had begun to settle, softened by the steady presence of someone who understood that loyalty isn't about perfection, it's about showing up, day after day, in small, imperfect ways. And as she looked ahead toward the horizon, painted with the faint glow of new light, she felt a flicker of hope, fragile yet real, that perhaps, with patience and loyalty, she could weather anything. The rain had washed away the darkness, leaving her with a quiet strength rooted in the honest, human support of someone who stayed. And in that stillness, she began to believe in the quiet resilience that would carry her forward, step by step, through storms and calm alike. The first hint of dawn seeped through the cracked curtains, casting a soft, golden glow into her small apartment. She sat at the worn kitchen table, a cup of lukewarm tea cradled in her hands. For the first time in a long while, her gaze was less vacant, more curious. The ache in her chest had softened, replaced by a fragile sense of possibility that she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't a sudden burst of hope, but a slow, steady awakening, like the first gentle rays of sunlight piercing through a stormy sky. She looked down at her hands, the ones that had once only been tools for survival, now trembling with something new, a whisper of purpose. The act of holding that simple cup of tea, of breathing in the quiet morning, felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she'd buried beneath exhaustion and despair. She'd begun to remember that her worth was not defined by the shadows of her past or the invisibility she often felt. It was something embedded deep within, waiting patiently for her to notice it again. Her mind drifted to small moments, her quiet acts of resilience, the way she had kept going despite everything. She remembered the nights she'd stayed up after working long shifts, sketching little doodles on scrap paper, her mind wandering to dreams she'd long suppressed. Now she let herself dream again, slowly and without judgment. She imagined a future where her voice mattered, where she could teach others that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it's a gentle whisper that persists through the noise. She thought about sharing her stories, not as a way to be rescued, but as a gift, an act of reclaiming her voice and inspiring others who felt invisible, just as she once did. Her smile was tentative at first, like the fragile bloom of a flower after a long winter. It felt foreign, yet real, warm even in its softness. She reached for a battered sketchpad that had sat untouched for months, and with trembling fingers began to draw. Lines and shapes emerged, nothing perfect but honest. Each stroke felt like a small declaration: I am here. I am capable. I am enough. She didn't need a hero to save her. She only needed to remember that her own resilience was enough to forge her path. The act of creating became her quiet rebellion against the emptiness she'd known. It was in these moments she learned that her purpose was not something waiting at the end of a long road, but something she could cultivate within herself every day. Each day, she would add a little more color, a little more detail, reminding herself that she was building her own story, one rooted not in rescue, but in self-discovery. She realized her worth was not dictated by others' perceptions, but by her own recognition of her strength. She felt a gentle wind stir the curtains, carrying the promise of another day. The world outside was still uncertain, but inside her, a quiet revolution was unfolding, one where hope blossomed from within, unshaken by external storms. She understood now that healing wasn't linear. It was a mosaic of small, imperfect pieces fitting together over time. She had begun to teach herself that her silence was not weakness, but a space where her true voice could grow. Her eyes, previously dulled by fatigue, sparkled with a newfound purpose. She would share her stories, her struggles, her triumphs, not to seek validation, but to remind others that their worth is intrinsic. The dawn stretched across the sky, painting the world in hues of possibility. She stood up, stretching her limbs, feeling the gentle strength of her own body, her own spirit. With each breath, she felt more rooted, more whole. The journey ahead was still unfolding, but she was no longer waiting for rescue. She was becoming her own light, steady, unwavering, a quiet force of hope that would inspire others to find their own. As she stepped outside, the cool air kissed her cheeks, a reminder that life was still beautiful, still full of potential. And with every step she took, she carried within her the silent promise that her story was only just beginning, an endless horizon of possibility waiting to be explored. Under the glow of string lights and the warm hum of a gathering crowd, she stood on the makeshift stage, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the microphone. The community had come together, neighbors, friends, familiar faces, and some unfamiliar, drawn by a shared desire for connection and understanding. She looked out at them, the flickering hope of vulnerability swirling in her chest. For the longest time, she'd hidden behind her silence, convinced her voice wasn't enough, that her story didn't matter. But tonight she knew she could no longer stay silent. A deep breath steadied her trembling voice as she began to speak, each word tentative at first, then gaining strength. She shared her journey, not as a tale of heroism, but as a testimony of resilience, of tiny acts of strength that had kept her moving forward despite the weight of invisibility and doubt. She described the nights she'd sat alone, the moments she'd almost given up, and the small acts that had begun to rekindle her hope, the sketching, the dreaming, the quiet acts of resistance that had grown into a spark of purpose. Her voice wavered, but her eyes shone with conviction. She told them how she'd learned that her worth wasn't dictated by anyone else, that her scars were not signs of weakness but badges of survival. She looked into their faces, some familiar, some strangers, and saw the reflection of her own fears and her own strength. As she spoke, a gentle silence fell over the crowd, an acknowledgement of her courage, a collective recognition of the humanity she had always carried within but rarely dared to show. When her voice broke, she paused, and a ripple of applause began, not loud, but steady, an organic wave of acceptance and solidarity. It wasn't about applause for her, it was a celebration of her truth, a communal embrace of vulnerability and courage. With trembling hands, she stepped down from the stage, and the crowd parted to let her pass, faces softening in understanding. She felt the warmth of their acceptance seep into her, anchoring her in a way words alone never could. That night, in that shared space of raw honesty, she saw her reflection in their eyes. She realized she'd been carrying her story alone for so long, but now, she was no longer invisible. She was seen, truly seen, not as the broken girl she'd once believed herself to be, but as a testament to quiet resilience and unspoken strength. The community had witnessed her confrontation with fear, her willingness to stand before them and reveal her truth, and in doing so, they had also confronted their own doubts about vulnerability and acceptance. Her courage had become a bridge, connecting her to others and reminding everyone that healing begins when we dare to be seen, to speak what's hidden inside. As she stepped back into the warm night air, the stars above seemed to shimmer a little brighter, bearing witness to her transformation. She felt a lightness she'd never known, a gentle recognition that her story had power, not because she had to rescue herself in a grand way, but because she had chosen to share her truth. And in that sharing, she had begun to heal not only herself but also the fabric of her community. Her heart was full, not with perfection but with hope, hope that her voice could inspire others to find theirs. She looked around at the gathered faces, feeling the silent promise of continued connection, of ongoing growth. The night air carried the faint scent of rain, cleansing and renewing. She took a step forward, knowing this was only the beginning, the moment where her courage transformed from whispered fears into a collective chorus of acceptance. And as she moved into the darkness, she carried with her the quiet strength of 1,000 small, brave acts, an invitation for everyone to find their voice amidst the silence, to let their stories unfold in the light. The horizon stretched out in endless possibility, and she was ready to meet it, no longer afraid, but alive with purpose and hope. The evening air was thick with quiet anticipation as she entered her childhood home, the familiar creak of the door welcoming her back. The house was still, shadows dancing softly along the walls, but in her heart, she carried a tumult of emotions, hope intertwined with years of pain, doubt shadowed by a fragile desire for reconciliation. Her father sat in his worn armchair, head bowed, hands trembling slightly as he leafed through an old photo album. Their eyes met across the dim room, and for a moment either spoke. The silence stretched, heavy but pregnant with unspoken truths. She took a cautious step forward, her voice trembling but steady. "I came to talk, if you're ready." His eyes fluttered with recognition and something else, perhaps remorse, perhaps a long-buried longing for understanding. Slowly, he set the album aside and looked up, his gaze finally settling on her with a mixture of regret and regret's quieter companion, hope. "I was wrong," he said softly, voice thick with emotion. "I didn't see you, not really. I thought I was protecting you by pushing you away, by telling you to be invisible. But I was only turning my back on your strength, on who you truly are." Tears welled in her eyes, but she held them back, listening intently as he continued. "I was afraid of what I didn't understand, afraid of losing you. I thought I was doing what was best, but I see now that I was wrong. I miss your courage, your resilience, the quiet fire inside you that refused to be extinguished." His voice cracked, and he reached out, hands trembling as he took hers in his. "I'm sorry I didn't see you for who you were. I see it now, and I want you to know that I'm proud of you. Proud of how far you've come, of your strength, and of your willingness to stand here today and speak your truth." She felt her heart soften, the years of pain gradually giving way to a warmth she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. The tears she'd fought to hold back finally spilled over, and she let them, tears of forgiveness, of release, of understanding. "I was just trying to survive," she whispered. "I didn't think anyone would see me, really see me, not until I saw myself first." Her father's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and in that moment they both understood that forgiveness was a slow river, meandering, sometimes turbulent, but ultimately moving toward peace. They sat together in quiet embrace, the past dissolving like mist in the dawn, replaced by a fragile hope that this moment was the beginning of something new. The house, once a symbol of silence and distance, now felt infused with a gentle light, an acknowledgement that wounds can heal when love and understanding are allowed to seep through the cracks. As she turned to leave, her father called softly, "You've always been stronger than you knew. I see that now. And I am grateful for the chance to see you, really see you, for the person you are." Walking back into the night, she felt a lightness she hadn't known in years, as if the universe itself had softened its grip on her heart. The stars above shimmered like distant beacons of hope, guiding her toward a future where wounds could be mended not with grand gestures, but with patience, humility, and truth. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she carried with her the knowledge that even broken bonds could be woven anew, thread by gentle thread. Every tear shed, every apology offered, was a step toward wholeness. Her soul, once weighed down by shadows, now soared with the quiet promise of renewal. And as she looked up at the vast sky, she understood that forgiveness, like the dawn, was a slow, deliberate unfolding, a poetic reminder that light always finds a way through even the darkest night. She breathed in the cool air, feeling the gentle whisper of wind as an invitation to embrace hope, to step into the future with open hands and an open heart. The journey was far from over, but she was no longer afraid to walk it, knowing that love, patient, imperfect, resilient, would always find a way to heal. As the first light of dawn stretched across the horizon, the sky unfurled in hues of soft pink and gold, casting a gentle glow over a world that had once seemed so vast and cold. The quiet of early morning settled like a blessing, wrapping everything in a tender embrace. She stood outside, breath slow and deliberate, watching as the stars gradually faded into the awakening sky. The night had held its secrets, its shadows and silence, but now, in the calm after the storm, she felt a quiet reassurance, an understanding that love, real and enduring, isn't a sudden miracle but a slow, patient process. It's the dawn after the darkness, the first breath after a long exhale. The world around her was alive with subtle symphonies, leaves whispering in the breeze, birds stirring from their slumber, the distant hum of life awakening. It was as if nature itself was reminding her that renewal is always possible, even after the deepest wounds. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the cool air on her skin, listening to the subtle music of the morning. In that stillness, she saw the stars fading, but their lingering light remained, a gentle reminder that no matter how dark the night, the stars are never truly gone. They're merely hidden behind the veil of dawn, waiting to shine again. Love, she realized, isn't about magic or quick fixes. It's about showing up, day after day, with patience and understanding. It's about finding strength in vulnerability, courage in silence, and hope in the smallest gestures, like a shared look, a quiet apology, a moment of forgiveness that blooms slowly like a flower opening to the sun. Love is the quiet resilience that whispers, "You are not alone," even in the loneliest of nights. It's the gentle reminder that, no matter how heavy the burden, we are all walking through our own dawns, waiting for the light to seep in. As the sun cresting the horizon cast long golden shadows, she felt a profound sense of peace settle within her. The journey had been long, filled with tears and breakthroughs, but each step had led her here, closer to herself, closer to understanding that love isn't a destination but a continuous unfolding. It's in the small, quiet moments, like the first light spilling across the earth, that the true magic resides. Not in grand gestures, but in the everyday acts of resilience and hope that remind us we are never truly alone. And so, with the sky painted in delicate pastels, she took a deep breath, feeling the promise of a new day. The world was waking up, and so was she, ready to move forward, carried by the knowledge that love, in its purest form, is the quiet proof that no one is alone in their journey. That even in the silence, in the scars, and in the waiting, there's beauty. There's hope. There's the possibility of rebirth. Let this be a reminder, no matter where you are in your story, love is always quietly waiting to bloom, slowly, patiently, resiliently. Sometimes, it's in the gentle dawn, in the rising sun after the storm, that we find the strength to carry on. So hold on to that hope. Keep showing up. Because the dawn is always coming, and with it, the promise that you are never truly alone. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone. Like, subscribe, and let's walk this journey of resilience and hope together. Because in the end, we're all part of the same sunrise, each of us shining, waiting for our moment to bloom in the light.